Topic 6, imperialism. Right? Long time ago, right? When you have mercantilist school of thought, those European nations also go out and try to colonize other people, right? But the most important one based on economic perspective will be around what you hear mean third of the 19th century and beyond, right? Because during this period of imperialism, they are more related or driven by economic factor. Some background: the late 8th and the first half of the 19th century, they are drive to industrialization. Right? Then capitalists try to conquer, colonize, subjugate, and exploit area of the world lying outside the North Atlantic region. I mean other region than the European region. But that one is temporary, according to those research, right, and not intense. Right? In Africa, for example, right, despite a century of battle, right, war, European capitalist country hardly penetrate beyond the coastal area by the early 19th century. I mean, in Africa, they only colonize, right, on the coastal area, just only few percentage of their whole Africa area, right, not all. However, the last third of the 19th century and beyond, when you have industrial, finance, and commercial power becoming more concentrated in the hand of a giant corporation. If you notice that those Marxism, they also explain why this industry or commercial power or financial power being concentrated on the hand of some giant corporation. So internal financial empire will be built within all the major capitalist country, right? Therefore, during this last third of the 19th century and beyond, economics term this imperialism as capitalist imperialism. Right? I mean, they are driven by a capitalism factor. Right? The major industrialized capitalist country brutally and forcefully subdue area all over the earth for profit and for potential profit of giant corporation. Profit or potential profit. This profit and potential profit include raw material like tin mine, gold, right, and cheap labor, like they can make it cheap labor in the African and Asian country, and also for the potential export market. I mean, this capitalist European country can export their product over there. Of course, there are different theory. Some will even claim that they have a lot of surplus of capital. They need to use it, need to build warship, anything, and then export it to other country, the country that they colonized. By the early 20th century, after ruthless and barbaric onslaught, about 93% of Africa has been forcefully subjugated or colonized to foreign capital rules. You compare to previously, they say hardly penetrate beyond the coastal area, beyond the seaside area, the inside area of Africa, they're still free, not yet colonized. But during the last third of the 19th century, 93% of Africa, right, by the colonial capitalist rule. This capitalist country, you will see here mostly are in Europe, France, England, Germany, Belgium, Portugal, and Spain. During the late 19th century, much of the remainder of Asia divided among the European power. As you can see also, Malaysia, Indonesia, right? India to British, Afghanistan to British, Russia, Indochina to France, right? Malay Peninsula, they are British, Germany, Holland, right? Then you got also American imperialism gain control of all these places, countries, Samoa Island, Hawaii, Puerto Rico, Philippines, right? All these are dominated by so-called European and American capitalist nation. Two reasons for imperialism by capitalist nation. First is the general. Later on, we study three specific capitalist imperialism theory. Generally, the two reasons for imperialism by capitalist nation are: first, most of these conquered people had been living in traditional non-capitalist, non-market society. Hence, their traditional culture represent barrier to the commercial exploitation, resource grabbing desired by large capitalist corporation. For example, let's say in Peninsular Malaysia, right, or the Malay Ecopolis, these are Asia world, or in Africa, right? My no market, they don't have a capitalist market. Mostly they are just for local market, or some even for local plantation, or some even got feudalism, right? So if let's say big corporation want to sell something to them, it's very hard. They don't even have an infrastructure. They don't have a large seaside port for international trade. So in this case, to penetrate, or maybe they have a lot of natural resources, like Malaysia have tin mine, right? So they have to conquer, colonize, and imperialize them. Second, term of trade that were much more favorable to industrial capitalist country could be established if this capitalist country effectively rule the underdeveloped country. So for example, if England want to sell goods to Germany, they may only get very thin profit margin. But if England want to export, or be so-called forcefully export, or force the Asian or Malaysian, Peninsular Malaysia, Peninsular Malaya people to buy or want to sell in Africa, they have a better term of trade. I mean, they can sell at higher price. Indirectly, it's also implied not a fair trade. Okay? Neoclassic economics never address any of the theoretical inquiry into this issue of imperialism. When you study micro, or even perhaps macro, all your theory will not, you will never have this imperialism factor put inside. Like determination of price, supply and demand. What determines supply, what determines demand? You don't have this so-called imperialism. Like if you study Keynesian only neoclassic, you see Y equals to C plus I plus G, but then they don't study imperialism, right? Mostly, right? Why? Because for them, all economic theory was merely an extension of the elaboration of theory of exchange. Aspects of imperialism that did not involve purely voluntary economic exchange were defined as not economic, and therefore not their concern. Right? Because imperialism, you go there, you grab other people mineral resources, right? So, and then you take them as your slave. It's not an exchange, right? It's just a capture. So it's considered as non-market, right? Non-market is not included in their studies. Aspects involving exchange were no different than any other exchange. Both parties benefited and harmony prevailed. Right? They ignore the relative bargaining power of the exchanger in their analysis of exchange and celebrate the universal benefit and harmony of the result of exchange. For example, like just now, say mentioned England selling thing to Africa country. The England may sell at an extremely high profit margin, right? When they buy resources, or they grab resources for free, or they buy resources from Africa at extremely low prices. So we got the classic school only consider that, or that there is an exchange, and always every exchange will give you mutual benefit. They ignore the relative bargaining power. Of course, in this case, the big capitalist colonial will have more power than the country being colonized. Right? So that's why imperialism, or capitalist imperialism, is not covered in some of the neoclassic or mainstream economics subject. There are many economic theories outside the neoclassic tradition who concern with the imperialism. Three famous one, or more important one, will be Hobson, Luxemburg, and Lenin. The last two will be more related to socialism and capitalism, while the Hobson are more liberal. Okay? Yeah. First, we study the Hobson theory of capitalist imperialism. John A. Hobson was an extraordinary productive intellectual. He wrote a lot of books, a lot of articles, more than 30 volumes, right? One of his book called Imperialism, a Study, first published in 1902, was probably the most influential study of imperialism ever published. So this one is more on imperialism. Okay. Hobson saw imperialism as a social parasite process by which a money interest within the state usurping a region of government make for imperial expansion in order to fasten economic succor into the foreign body, so that is to drain them of their wealth and to support domestic luxury. Meanwhile, those who had money interest or profit interest try to how to influence or override the government so that they will have imperialism expansion. They'll try to explore and colonize other nations, right, and drain them of their wealth. For example, they colonized Malaysia or Malaya at that time, drain them of their natural resources like gold. They go to Africa, they capture their population and sell them as a slave, or get all the mineral in Africa. Also got a lot of natural resources, right? So why? To support their domestic luxury, but it's also actually to support the individual interests themselves, right? The official propaganda that justify imperialism. Of course, when you go out and colonize other people, they usually try to give some reason, right? And the reason they give for the Hobson is actually not the reason, right? They're not the actual reason. So what's the reason? Usually this propaganda to justify imperialism, they claim is a benevolent quest to civilize, uplift, and bring Christianity to the lower race or lower class, right? Or undeveloped population. The real motive of imperialism were hidden. So they colonize a country. They claim that they are trying to help them, not colonize them, not parasite on them, right? And not to take advantage of them, but they are trying to help them to civilize, uplift them, and so-called bring Christianity to them, right? I think all these are good. Like until now, so last time World War II, Japanese occupation of Asia, also they use a slogan that they'll free Asia from Western colonization. And even now, Russia invasion in Ukraine, also they give a propaganda reason to justify as a peacemaker, right? So these are some of the reasons they give: civilized, uplift, and Christianity, which Hobson claimed that is not actual reason. So what's the actual reason? Later on. The primary forces promoting the indirect imperialism in Hobbes' view was the ceaseless or drive to accumulate capital and then to invest the profit derived from this capital into new and equally profitable capital. The problem was that as capital was accumulated, it became more and more difficult to find investment outlet domestically. So need to venture out through imperialism. Right? I mean, when capitalism industrialization, I think more and more developed, you find that it's very hard to invest domestically and gain equal profit, right, or even more profit. So you need to venture outside. If I remember, in some 19 somethings, 1970s, 1980s, so I think same thing happened to Japan when you notice a lot of foreign direct investment from Japan, or Japan foreign outward investment, because the Japan developed too much already, so there's hardly any good or very profitable investment, so they have to venture outside. So this is for Hobson is the main reason for imperialism, not to civilize, uplift, or bring Christianity. Those imperialist capitalist country, they colonize a country not because they have this motive or good motive to try to civilize them and try to bring good life to them. No, it's actually they are trying to bring good life to themselves. Okay? Beneficiary, who's the main beneficiary? You see, under this imperialism, if you analyze properly, the main or actual beneficiary is not the Christian missionary. I mean, to bring Christianity is not reason, right? Or those are irrational politician or military or anything, right? The main beneficiary is a giant bank, financial houses, big firm engaged in building warship, manufacturing gun rifle and military supplies, and of course the third one, the great manufacturer of export trade, who gain by supplying real or artificial one to a new country that annex or open up. Right? Who you see the main beneficiary is those bank, financial house that finance the exploration, finance the imperialism, right? Finance the export trade to further country. And of course, the big firm that build the warship, guns, all these things they can sell, and also the exporter, right? They can export more to other country at a bigger profit margin, like because you see, term of trade is not fair. Right? So you put it in a flow chart. Reason for capitalism required imperialism. Okay, first is the rapid and acceleration concentration of industry power and wealth that had occurred in the third of the 19th century. When the corporation become bigger and bigger, more and more countries become developed, right? Then you notice that the cost of production become higher, and then lesser new opportunity for business or new opportunity for investment. Right? So then you have this called domestic inequality. When you have industrialization in the European country during the 19th century, you notice that the workers still spend all of their income on consumption. In a simple word, I mean, workers are being paid extremely low wages. They can just use all the wages for subsistence, right? On income or consumption. They hardly have any saving. Right? On the other hand, the capitalist has so much profit. Therefore, so much profit until they cannot spend. They cannot spend either. They don't have time or to spend all the money. For example, you suddenly have 10 billion. Can you spend it 10 billion in one day? No, you don't have time. And they themselves don't have the intention to spend all their income because they are more focused, or they are more tendency to invest their saving, their income into input, right, or capital accumulation for future profit. So capitalists have so much forced saving for further capital accumulation. Therefore, you see the supply growth exceeds the demand growth imbalance. The supply of capital means the supply of money, supply of machineries is more than the supply of output. So they invest more capital, more machinery, produce more output. This growth of output is more than the demand for output. Why? Because capitalists themselves, they don't intend to spend every single cent they earn, right? Then workers themselves, the salary, the wages didn't increase that much. They don't have saving, they just spend on subsistence. Therefore, this create imbalances. And when you have these imbalances, you will cause economic recession or depression because supply of output more than demand of output. So you have market glut. Right? So to solve this problem, right, or this problem also actually costs fewer possible for profitability investment outlet domestically. If you're in your country domestically, your supply of output is much more than the demand for output. So where will going to be have a profitability investment outlet? So to solve this problem, actually 2-in-1 problem is to venture outside through imperialism and foreign investment and solution. You try to colonize a country where the economics are still extremely not developed. Right? They destruct all their economic system, right? That also called traditional system. Then they can sell their output there through export, or they finance they generate the capital to finance the imperialism return or colonization and exploration and export trade, right? So, but in order to have imperialism and foreign investment as solution, you need to destroy the traditional institution in the foreign country, and then put them under the market capitalism. Like mentioned just now, if let's say in most of the area of Asian or African, right, less country, they don't engage in international trade. They are still considered as traditional society. The economy may be just barter trade or self economy. So they need to make them to engage in the trade, make them borrow money from the foreign banks, all this thing, right? So in order to justify or to make their imperialism look good, maybe in other words, if I steal your money and I still want to make myself look good, I will say that I just help you to spend. Since you have so much money, you don't know how to spend. You got headache of thinking how to spend. So I just help you to spend. So give me. So you try to have some reason to justify. That's right. So need to have a good reason to justify, at least to so-called cover up the imperialism and exploitation, to make it look good. Right? So that's why they use the civilized, Christianized, and uplift. Right? So this for Hobbes is just a cover up reason, not the actual reason. Okay? So what is the implication of Hobbes' thought? Imperialism did not benefit a capitalist nation as a whole. As a whole, they are not beneficiary to everyone. So who is the one that has not received any benefit? Of course, very clearly, the worker group, right? It benefits the wealthy at a very high price to the ordinary worker, both in tax and in blood, right? Not only really the wealthy, but some specific wealthy person, like mentioned just now, a few class like the bankers, financial, those who engage in export market, those who engage in war economy or so-called produce warship, goods, rifle, guns, machinery, all these will be even more benefited, right? The only hope in the fight to curb imperialism was for the worker to take more power into their own hand or to create a real democracy, right? You see, all these implication can also lead to one statement that you can find in your normal textbook economy, that is the importance of middle class. Right? Well, here you see the workers are so low in income, the capitalists are so high in income, they don't have a middle class to absorb these imbalances, the excess of goods produced compared to the so low of demand. Right? So in this case, the implication is to stop the imperialism, you have to increase the worker benefit, increase more power, or in this case, they so-called real democracy. Wealth and income would never be concentrated. Therefore, the taproot of imperialism would be removed. And he used the word taproot. Taproot mean like the main reason, the main causes of imperialism would be removed, right? Why? Because the main causes is domestic inequality. Right? Workers are so poor, capital are so rich, then output overgrow the demand, supply, and then in this case cause unprofitability or even a serious possibility of recession. So unless you imperialize and then venture outside. Okay? So these are the thought of hopes. And another popular or important theory of capitalist imperialism is Rosa Luxemburg was most important and influential of the political and intellectual leader of the left wing of the German. If you see the left wing definition, of course, there are some different definition based on different perspective, right? Generally, the left wing mean emphasize on idea of freedom, equality, reform. Right wing are more pro-government, right? Communist, socialist, right? Right wing are more authority than a dictatorship, all these things, right? Therefore, this Rosa Luxemburg has a very pity life, right? She was attacked, severely beaten, and murdered by the right-wing German soldier in 1919. And so, what are her theory on capitalist imperialism? Right? Again, imperialism in this last third of the 19th century, they call it capitalist imperialism because capitalism is the root cause of the imperialism, or in Hobbes' words, in the taproot of the imperialism. Okay? So her analysis also quite similar in some sense, and in some sense a bit different. Her analysis of imperialism is contained in her best-known work, The Accumulation of Capital, and then subsequent defense on the title Accumulation of Capital and Anti-Critic. Right? In The Accumulation of Capital, Luxemburg's intention was to show that on the basis of Marxism, right, they have two sectors. I mean, he assumed that you have two sectors. One is producing the mean of production, the mean input, right, or capital goods. The second sector is producing consumer goods. The first is capital goods. You see the similarity or not? Growth of sector 1 is higher than growth of sector 2. The growth here are imbalances. The growth of output, right, are higher because the capitalist profit are very high, right? But growth faster than the growth of the worker income, right? So you have this called growth of sector 1, which producing the capital goods is higher. So this cause imbalances was inevitable. I mean, there are imbalances. These are some part that's similar to the Hobson. It was necessary for capitalism to constantly and perpetually to capture new non-capitalist market in order to sell this surplus commodity, right? I mean, the domestic market cannot absorb. So the capitalist should realize their profit. If this oversupply of output, the capitalists produce, but there are not enough demand to buy it, so the capitalists cannot gain profit. Right? As capitalism grow, potential source of internal expansion has been exhausted. Right? Therefore, foreign imperialist expansion has become essential for the survival of capitalism. When you grow more and more and more, less profit opportunity unless you venture outside to capture a new untapped or so-called traditional market, right? Of course, this analysis of Rosenberg, there are many who criticize them. If you study economics history of economic thought, anything that you can relate it to Marxism are sure invited a lot of criticism, right? Then some like this John Robinson heavily criticized Rosenberg analysis because they claim that it's based on unrealistic assumption. But after substituting some of the analytic assumption, or in other words, mean do some practical adjustment, right? This Rosenberg theory on capitalist imperialism actually give some important contribution. Right? Again, if you analyze Rosenberg and Hobson theory, the first part here are the same. Domestic inequality, but maybe if they're using different terms. One is they call domestic inequality, another they call what they call here imbalances between sector 1 and sector 2. Right? Sector 1 growth of output is higher than demand for output is because growth of capital is higher than the growth of income for these workers. Right? So few possibility investment domestically, and then therefore imperialism. Right? Of course, Hobson will continue by saying that this imperialism they use false justification, but for Luxembourg, her contribution actually are the extension from this Hobson. First, imperialism and foreign investment as solution. So forced destruction of traditional non-market economy for capitalist exploitation. In Luxembourg terms, she used natural, but it's actually referred to non-market economy for capital exploitation. How? First, you will reduce the glut of capital at home. Later, we'll continue this one. Second, you will stimulate a demand for imperialist export, country export, material for building, harbor, road, all these things. Now, to continuously have high profit, the capitalists will encourage the country go out, colonize other people, right? In this process, after they colonize other people, they can stimulate demand by exporting their domestically produced good, or in this case, it's an excess or glut of capital or excess of output to the new colonial country, right? Then you to reduce the glut of capital. On the other hand, on the another side, they also can utilize this glut of capital for material for building harbor, road, and all the necessary physical means for exploitation of conqueror. So here you see you have a lot of capital. The capitalists gain a lot of money, a lot of capital, cannot be used profitably domestically. So how do they use it? They use by building new harbor, building big warship, financing big warship, financing exploration and conquer, right? So or after you conquer the colonial country, you export your domestic capital to the colonial country to help them, or so-called help them, or help the company or the country that colonized to build road, to build infrastructure at the colonist or at the colony country. For example, if let's say Germany colonized Africa, or some European country colonized Africa, so the capital in this European capitalist country can send or invest in the African country to open up road, to open up factory, to lend to those corporation to open their factory or open their sales, their market there. So you can solve the glut of capital to reduce the glut of capital at home, right? Hobson need to destroy, usually force the traditional institution in the economic country, then brought them under market capitalism. It's a bit similar. Only the term used by Rosenberg are more, if you compare to previous topic on Marxism, are more like consistent, or they use the term by Marxism, destruction of traditional non-market. But Hobson, they used to destroy the traditional institution. is a bit similar. Okay? Yeah. Luxembourg and Marx's view on primitive accumulation. The Marxism slide also include the primitive accumulation inside. As a result, the imperialist country newly stimulate export. Okay, before that, primitive accumulation based on Marxism is the accumulation of capital before the real capitalism start. Right? I mean the pre-capital accumulation. Right? As a result, imperialist country newly stimulate export would not be offset by a corresponding volume of import, because they are already glutted of consumer commodity. Rather, export would offset by growing ownership of wealth at the conquered territory by the capitalists of the imperialist country. This means what? When imperialism or colonization, right? They colonize the country, then you stimulate export. I mean, the European capitalist country will export to the colonial, so-called less developed country or the traditional economic country. Okay? In this case, you will not invite a reciprocal of the European country or the capitalist European country import consumer goods. No, there will be reciprocal backed by a growing ownership of wealth. For example, you see Malaysia last time or Malaya last time, a lot of tin mine company, they are majority owned by foreign capital. Let's say 90% are owned by foreign capital, 10% are local ownership, or 80% are foreign capital, 20% local ownership. So you see, these newly stimulated export are not corresponding to the volume of import, but growing ownership of wealth of the conquered territory. In other words, imperialism was really an extension of what Marx has described as a primitive accumulation. This perhaps was Luxemburg's most lasting important contribution. Okay. In Marxism, he claimed that primitive accumulation is before the actual capital accumulation. Right? So after capital accumulation, no more. I mean, this is primitive is pre. But for Luxembourg, after the capitalist European country developed, I mean, post-capital accumulation, you can still come back to the primitive accumulation through imperialism in the colonial country. So this is an extension of what Marxism has described as primitive accumulation. Right? Whereas Marx has seen as a purpose of primitive accumulation as explaining only the historical origin of capital. You see, for Marxism or for Karl Marx, primitive accumulation is pre-capitalism, considered as the origin of capitalism. Luxemburg saw primitive accumulation as the inherent characteristic of capital accumulation. That means when you have capital accumulation, you have excess domestic imbalance, so you colonize or imperialize, then you start the primitive accumulation. Right? So it's an inherent characteristic of capital accumulation. Explaining the domain of capitalist social and economic relationship has always been a means by which accumulation of capital was made possible within the existing capitalist area. Right? I mean, the development within the developed area, something like that. Okay. Next, imperialist destruction of traditional economics. A natural, or in this case, is equivalent to a non-market economy, or equivalent to the traditional, like not really has a proper market as defined by the European capitalists. A natural or non-market economy thus confront the requirement of the capitalism at every turn with a rigid barrier. I mean, it's not compatible. For example, if you go into a jungle and in the community, you try to sell them motor, car, machine, television, astro, they will say no. They will try to sell them electric cooker, they will say no. So you see, this traditional non-market will confront with the requirement of a capitalism. Capitalism must therefore always and everywhere fight a battle to eliminate against every historical form of natural economy. So in order for you to sell electric cooker, gym equipment in a very remote area, or the community in a very remote area, so you have, for this Rosenberg and also Hobson, right, you have to destroy their way of life. Destroy in this case mean not to kill, mean completely change or brainwash them into live the economy or the lifestyle just like them, just like the capitalists. And then they will accept or they integrated into the capitalist system. Then only they can exploit them even further. Right? In the imperialist struggle to subjugate natural economy, there were four objectives. Why they must do that? To gain possession of the vast amount of raw material in this country, either by taking ownership directly or making cheap commodity of this raw material. For example, they dig out the gold, dig out the tin mine directly, or they make them sell to them at an extremely low price. To destroy the traditional method of production, to separate every worker of having access to any means of production, thereby to create economic dependent wages. This one, if you study Marxism, you can notice that previously you have this traditional economy that, let's say, the artisan, right? They make vase, they make bowl, they make cup mixed on clay, then they themselves make it, they themselves sew it, they themselves get a profit. But when you convert to modern, so-called modern capitalism, they are not doing it. They only do one part of it, right? The capitalists actually hire the worker to, let's say, you go and find the resources, you press this machine and you do this process B, you do this process C, at the end, you do the marketing and packaging, at the end, and sell. So the worker are now not the owner. So they destroy this traditional method of production to transform the natural economy into a commodity or market of economy, to separate industry, trade, and agriculture, all of which generally constitute and interconnected to the whole natural economy. So in another word, mean they try to transform or change the way of living, most importantly, or most importantly, on the economic aspect of their living, their system, into what the European capitalist countries are doing. They change everything so that they can integrate or more compatible to their economy structure and system. Then they can exploit them even more easier and even more intense, right? So what are the implications of Luxembourg imperialism theory? No single conquest or wave of conquest could permanently solve the economic imbalances. For example, in this case, what does it mean? Previously, we see that imbalances domestically, so they have to don't have enough or very fewer profit investment opportunity domestically, so they have to venture outside, exploration and colonization. Right? But in this case, no single conquest can solve everything. For example, let's say Germany try to colonize, let's say like country A, right, or Indonesia. One colonization not enough. They can just temporarily solve the problem. Also, they right? And we totally animated into the capitalist system. Then the capitalist system, including the newly assimilated theory, once again encounter the same problem. It originally lead to the imperial expansion. For example, let's say the developed capitalist country A try to conquer the not developed capitalist country X. So when they conquer the country X, they exploit and then they expand the market. So they've temporarily solved the domestic glut. But when this country X also fully exploited, then the whole problem repeat again, right? And the whole process again. Therefore, capitalism ceaselessly had to attempt the expansion of its border. Then they non-stop have to expand the border through exploration and colonization, extended primitive accumulation in the form of imperialist subjugation and subsequent destruction of all non-capitalist social and economic structure was a permanent feature of capitalism. So in other words, Luxembourg see that capitalism has a feature of, or naturally will create imperialism. Right? Not imperialism create capitalism, it's capitalism actually will create imperialism. Luxembourg realized that militarism has always been an integral part of capitalism. Therefore, just now mentioned that capitalism actually need continuous imperialism, and this imperialism during that time is on militarism. But later on in the 20th centuries, right, imperialism, people or economists will think that no more using military, but soft imperialism or so-called economics dependent imperialism or economic imperialism, or some will say that social or cultural imperialism, right? They try to change the culture into like the Western culture, Western type culture, right? So in the period of the so-called primitive accumulation, militarism is a mean for colonization. So previously, militarism is the main tools for colonization. And is employed to subject the modern colony to destroy the social organization, right, of primitive society, when it means traditional society, so that their mean of production may be appropriated and forcibly to introduce commodity trade to the conqueror advantage. It is responsible for the creation and expansion of spheres of interest for the exporting railway concession in backward country. Railway concession in backward country. Does this sound familiar? With the, some may think that the Belt and Road country, right, they are actually encouraging those less developed country or developing country to build big port to upgrade their infrastructure railway, right? They will lend money to you to build, but at the end, after they build the port or the railway, it become not really beneficial. Then they suffer losses. So some may think that this is part of the not military imperialism but economic imperialism. Right? You see the description is a bit similar, but of course it's a debate in economics. There's always got one hand on the other hand. And for the enforcing claim of conqueror, capital as international lender. So when capitalist country colonize, they not only take the natural resources or they take the labor, they actually also force them to build railway or concession of to build railway, and force them to buy their own product, so international, and then also to lend them money as international lender. Finally, militarism is a weapon in the competitive struggle between capitalist country for the area of non-capitalist civilization. Here, militarism is a weapon in competitive struggle between capitalist country. That means all these capitalist countries, as mentioned just now, like example, France, Germany, Spain, Portugal, they among themselves are very competitive. Each one of them try to colonize and explore and conquer the market of other non-market or traditional country as much as possible, right? For example, if let's say England say that never mind, I don't want to colonize, I just sit down here. If all other countries colonize, they are much bigger, right? They are so big, they have so many colonies, then the economy growing, then England will have a problem, right? Not competitive. So all these capitalist countries will have a competitive struggle to colonize as many areas of non-capitalist civilization. Right? The Lenin theory of capitalist imperialism. Lenin, of course, you know, is a communist leader, right? A very influential leader of the Bolshevik Party, Communist Party, and his writing remain most influential within nearly all contemporary Communist Party. Among his most frequently read and quote work is Imperialism, the highest stage of capitalism. From the title, you know that he actually linked imperialism to capitalism, right? Therefore, you have this term called capitalist imperialism, which was written in 1916. Lenin acknowledged the influence of Hobson's book and extended to him. So Lenin's idea is not completely new. He acknowledged, and in this case, he recognized the Hobson book, and also the theory are developed from there also. So again, like the Rosenberg, Lenin also have the Lenin theory of capital imperialism are also quite similar to Hobson. But of course, each three of them has some differences. Right? Lenin, like Hobson, began by emphasizing the massive industrial concentration. So you notice that it's same. Claim that when you have industrialization, right, then you have a big giant corporation, bigger government corporation, right, bigger financial institution. So you have massive industrial concentration that occurred in all industrialized capitalist countries during the late 19th and early 20th century. Again, like Hobson, Lenin says that the importance of bank and financial capital in bringing out the phenomenon of capitalist imperialism. You see here, when industry become very big, this corporation become very big, they need a support of financial institution. Right? So when everything grow bigger, it become like something like too big to fail, and then financial banks and financial capital are one of the very important element of capitalism that cannot do about. For example, can you in 24 hours or 48 hours close all the bank in this world? No, right? Because they are too important. Right? We become capitalist imperialism. Capitalist withdrawal from day-to-day managing of industrial enterprise give rise to the managerial class. Banking or financial sector in turn perform the function of overseeing the interests of capitalists, which Lenin considered as distinguishing feature of the imperialist stage of capitalism. What do I mean here? If you have a small, let's say for example, you have a small kedai runcit, and you have a small restaurant, you are the one who cook and at the counter to collect money and serve or take order, right? Or at least you are at the shop. But if your restaurant become franchise and so big, right, then you will not be the one who are going to manage it. So if you are a very big corporation, you are just the investor. You hire manager, you hire CEO to help you to analyze. You are just maybe the chairman, right? Inactively manage. So the capitalist withdrawal from the day-to-day managing of the company industry. So what do? You will have this manager class to look after your day. Then you also rely on the banking industry to perform the function of seeing the interest, right? The banking industry. So you rely on this banking, finance, and the others non-managerial classes. So here, the control exercised by bank constitute a financial oligarchy because the bank create a complex interwoven network of control, right? Here you have, when your company go bigger, you notice that they tend to leverage, right, in the financial term. So when you have leverage, the financial capital are very important for your company to profitability, future profitability, and current operation. So you have been indirectly controlled by financial oligarchy, right? In the network of control industrial commercial corporation through the ownership of stock, right? And more importantly, through the creation of interlocking board of directors between banks and other corporations, right? Lenin analyzed the economic foundation of the capitalism was very nearly the same as Hobson taproot, or the main causes is the excessive surplus of capital. If you remember the Hobson, because the capitalists earn so big profit by giving so little wages to the workers, this extraordinary or so big amount of profit or surplus, right? The capitalists cannot spend every single income or every single cent of the profit. Why? Because they don't have enough money, or they themselves don't have enough capability. They don't have enough time, and they themselves don't have enough capability to spend all the money. Plus, they don't have the intention to consume all their profit, because they want to reinvest as much as possible their profit as a new capital, so that to generate more profit. If they don't do so, I mean, if they don't reinvest the profit to generate more profit, and others competitors do so, they will become backward. I mean, if they don't continue to grow, other competitors grow bigger than them, then they become not competitive. So therefore, you create a very big amount of surplus of capital. Right? Need for new profitable investment outlet for surplus capital. When you have so much capital, you need new investment outlet. And domestically, the investment outlet become less and less and less when the country become more industrialized and more progress. Therefore, you need to venture outside, explore outside. Outside means other country, right? And imperialism motive. So similar, the export of capital was more important than export of commodity because it lead to a related induced increase in volume of export of commodity. Right? You are trying to, I would say, export the capital out, I mean, go outside, and then because you want to colonize, you export capital out to colonize, you can induce them to buy, so it also lead to increase in export. The ultimate source of power of any capitalist or capitalist enterprise, therefore national or international, was the coercive power of the state. Thus, the rule of financial capital depends not only on the control of over industrial or commercial of corporation, but also the control of the government. Right? Anyhow, you want to have imperialism, this big corporation, especially the financial capital, because they can finance war and finance corporation to establish in this traditional market or colonial world, they can finance those corporation for export, right? So this financial capital, the big capitalist enterprise, they themselves cannot hire their worker or ask their worker to take some knife or gun and then go and colonize. They have to control, or in other words, indirectly influence the government, right, to have this imperialism policy, so that they venture out. Right? Most important, international business cartel were dominated by a very few corporations with headquarters in one or two countries. So this is the first economic division of the world, business among cartel. For example, some cartel, they have country in India, some country in Africa, right? So they have division of cartel among the world. This reflects the second division of the world among the capitalist government also. So if you have different corporation in different headquarters in different country, so you divide the world through this big different corporation, and also through among the capitalist country, because this capitalist country only have few. Let's say England has some many interests on India and the Venezuela, Malaysia, Indonesia, right? For Spain, they're more on Spain, Portugal more on Philippines, right? America, they're more on Latin America, all these things. So they'll divide among the capitalist country. Lenin believed the war was consequences of the imperialist conflict among the great capitalist power, which were inevitably built into the very nature of imperialism. So besides the needs for new investment outlet beyond their country borders, Lenin also believed it's a consequence of imperialist conflict. I mean, this capitalist country, they try to outdo each other. Right? Capitalism always creates the insatiable chasers of passion for ever increasing profit. Capitalism always try to find more and more profit. So in other words, mean greed is good, right? In other speed also, you have this greed is good. Right? In every capitalist business, unless any attempt to take over a part of the river trust would result in financial losses exceeding financial gain. So capitalism will have the incentive to colonize and take over, as long as after they take over, they get a net positive gain. If let's say they try to invade a country, right, then they have war, they spend a lot on building wall, exploration, but at the end of the day, after colonized, they don't get anything. So like in this case, result in financial losses, then they will stop. Right? Conflict was inevitable if there were at least two rival trusts dividing the world market, even though the whole world got two. For example, you have democratic or capitalism versus the communism country, you still have the Cold War, right? As long as you have more than one, the minimum two different big country or big corporation or big country, so conflict is unavoidable. The substance of struggle was the control of the earth and all its resources, as well as the labor power of all its inhabitants. They try to take everything, right? Lenin insists that imperialism represents the last stage of capitalism, or in Lenin phase, moribund capitalism, just a phase. Lenin insists, however, that this was the last stage of capitalism and a prelude to the system of inevitable collapse. Right? So what we come to until now, the three theories of capitalist imperialism from Hobson, Luxemburg, and Lenin, there are some similarity and there are some differences. On the similarity side, Luxemburg's explanation of the root of imperialism was essentially the same as Hobson. So as Lenin, they are about the same. Lenin theory origin of imperialism add very little idea to Hobson. So you see, these three are about the same. The main root cause of imperialism is imbalances, glut of capital. Slightly different terms used, but the concept is still the same. Luxemburg, Lenin, and Hobson all show that capitalist investment in less developed countries was cohesively implemented, really confer any immediate benefit on most of the people, and was intended exclusively to take raw material of this country to give little in return and exploit an extreme degree of working people of the country. In other words, these three thinkers or philosophers also show that imperialism is like a plan, right? And it will not benefit most people. Even though in Hobson they say is to uplift the society, right? To improve the society, to help the less developed country, but it do not benefit other people. It benefit only the certain big capitalists. Was intended exclusively to take raw material. The main purpose is not to Christianize, not to civilize, but just to take the raw material and then give little in return, right? And exploit to the maximum degree. Right? In other words, regardless of what reason they used to cover up, imperialism did not benefit the colonized country, only a certain, did not benefit most people, only certain capitalists or the financial institution or the big capitalist country only. How about the differences? Both Lenin and Luxemburg believed that the forces of imperialism were inherent in the capitalist system and that no reform of capitalism had left its basis, right, could ever remove the evil of imperialism. Right? Actually, three of them also claim that capitalism itself is a root cause. Again, why? Because excess demand. Right? A lot of output, supply, produce, less demand. So they have to sell it outside. Or in another words, Luxemburg would say it's a glut of capital, too much capital that can produce too much output, less demand. Right? Lenin also. But for Lenin and Luxemburg, no cure. I mean, you cannot solve this one. Even though you reform the capitalism, you change the capitalism system, you try to make it better, it won't work. Right? Could ever remove the evil of capitalism. But Hobson claimed that reform of capital could mitigate the evil of imperialism, right, and make capitalism somehow more humane society. So on one hand, Lenin and Luxemburg claim that no use the capitalism, whatever you do also you won't use, right? But for Hobson, yes, you reform even though you still imperialism, but at least in a better way or less negative externality, right? Critics claim that the theory of both Luxemburg and Lenin contain error, mostly caused by influence of Marxism, right? View on the inevitability and inevitable demise of capitalism. You notice Marxism claimed that capitalism fate is will be destroyed at the end. Right? So Luxemburg and Lenin are heavily influenced by Marxism. So if Marxism wrong, I mean Luxemburg and Lenin theory were also wrong, right? So these are some of the differences. Also, Lenin improved Hobson's analysis of the imperialism by convincingly demonstrating that the growth of giant corporation, trusts, and cartel, as well as the extreme inequality in the distribution of income. Right? Hobson didn't really go detail on this aspect, but Lenin actually showed a lot of proof, right? Data on the giant corporation, trust, all these things, and extreme inequality actually lead to or fasten the imperialism. Right? Factor of both Hobson and Lenin saw as being the base of capitalism appear to be built on a very nature of matured capitalism. So you see, when capitalism matured or getting in a higher level, right? You're starting to industrialize, and then you start to have capitalism. Then you become grow and bigger. Again, there's less and less profitable investment domestically. Therefore, you have to venture outside through imperialism. So it's built into the very nature of mature capitalism. Right? Lenin analyzed the imperialism offered no direct refutation to the dominant conservative neoclassic view that foreign investment in less developed countries would benefit those countries by increasing their capital and thereby increasing their productivity and general economic well-being. However, Luxemburg convincingly showed that such investment was possible only after the traditional society and the pattern of human relations has been devastated. Lenin didn't directly or exclusively or extensively criticize the classic school. Classic school say what? Classic school say that believe that foreign investment in less developed country actually will at the end will do them good. For example, if foreign country invest in Malaysia, then you'll bring benefit. So it's a benefit of foreign direct investment, right? But Luxembourg clearly show that it may bring benefit, but only after a very serious destruction of the social institution, right? And the pattern of human relationship. So like completely destroy the whole thing. Right? Like you want to have the benefit, you change all the system, all your style, all your lifestyle, everything change, completely change. Then only you'll have. Or in most of NSA also you notice that those will claim that you won't benefit at all. Okay? So that's all.